YouTube accidentally became a podcast platform. How is Spotify differentiating itself from how YouTube works?
We tweeted out that we were sitting down with you.
Yeah.
Two biggest questions were discovery and revenue.
We're one of the world's largest subscription services. We're almost the size of Netflix. We're more than 250 million paying subscribers. So now creators get the size of a Netflix subscription base to tap into. This is going to be a game changer in how people monetize their content.
Today on the Colin and Samir Show, we're joined by the founder and CEO of Spotify, Daniel Ek.
We got to sit down with Daniel after Spotify made some pretty major announcements at an event in their downtown LA studios.
And I think something that was really surprising about the event was that there was a lot of creators there, not just video podcasters, but YouTube creators who make all types of different videos. And I think it signifies that Spotify is now moving in the direction of becoming a video platform, but with a totally different monetization model.
And an entirely different method of discovery. What we realized after sitting down with Daniel is that these two platforms could not be more different.
YouTube is primarily an ad-backed platform. Spotify is primarily a subscription-backed platform. So their push and their announcement is they're now going to share premium subscription revenue with creators. So I'm not sure if this is widely known by creators that you can upload your content to Spotify using Spotify for Creators. And then similar to YouTube, they have a partner program where you have to post at least 12 episodes. And I think you have to hit 10,000 consumption hours in 30 days. But let's talk about what podcasting means on YouTube. Because to be honest, it feels like video podcasting on YouTube has become incredibly significant. There's this incredible stat that 900,000 podcasts were launched in 2020. And I believe that podcasting took over for the daily vlog on YouTube.
In terms of the daily vlog letting you really get to know someone intimately, the daily vlog ended up feeling too edited, actually. And a long form podcast became the best way to truly get to know someone.
And it was the easiest, most repeatable format for creators. People were running out of content, ideas, and during the pandemic, there weren't that many ideas to do.
Yeah.
And that's when we saw this rush of video podcasting on YouTube. Now, the result of that is because YouTube is a algorithmic feed and has a revenue share already set up from AdSense, we saw video podcasters rush to YouTube. There's also no other place really to post your video podcast.
Yeah, and on YouTube, obviously, the more watch time, the better. So, I mean, ourselves included, when we're uploading really long episodes and people are watching for upwards of an hour, that's getting surfaced really well in the YouTube algorithm.
All right, we're going to come back here and debrief on our thoughts about how Spotify is approaching video creators after the conversation with Daniel. But while you're listening to this episode, the goal is for you to understand how your content can get discovered on Spotify and how you can make money on the platform.
If you're watching or listening right now and you're a video creator, Spotify is coming for you.
And if you're watching on Spotify, Spotify also has comments now.
And Spotify already got you if you're watching on Spotify.
That's true. That's true. And if
I don't mean for this to be scary, but...
And if you're watching on YouTube, then there's a link to watch this on Spotify.
And Spotify is coming for you.
You're making it sound scary.
Yeah, it's
all
not,
right.
It's not
Here's
scary.
our conversation with Spotify CEO Daniel Ek. All right, Daniel, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you guys for having me.
Obviously you guys made a lot of announcements and there's a lot of discussion about kind of opening the aperture for what it means to be a creator on Spotify. I think that the majority of our audience and listeners, when they think about Spotify and podcasting, very familiar with the big deals that you guys did, right? The Joe Rogans, the Call Her Daddies, the Dax Shepard. These were like NBA contracts for creators. And it kind of opened up everybody's eyes to what it means and how influential podcasting is.
Right.
How did those deals and those relationships, how have those informed what this chapter of Spotify looks like and opening up to a wider group of creators?
Well, I mean, there's so much to unpack there. But I feel like even from the beginning, like we've always thought about how we can grow the number of creators that are successful on Spotify. And it really started with music in itself. Like how can we democratize listening and how can we make it so that people can get the listening experience they want, but at the same time fairly compensating the artists that are on the platform. And in doing so, we wanted obviously a platform that didn't just tailor to the top 100 or top 40 at the time, but really for anyone who wanted to have their music, creating their music and broadening it. So that's very much been the ethos of the company. But as you said, when we got into podcasting, we had to take a very different approach. And we took a different approach because if you think about the landscape in podcasting, it's really interesting for me to just see how much it's evolved. But it was something where there was an industry giant at a time that pretty much been dominating the industry for about 17 years, but it was tapering off. Podcast wasn't growing to the same extent as it had been prior. We had obviously sort of big moments every few years where a podcast sort of broke out and sort of made a story. But it really felt to me that, we needed to, in order to have a chance of succeeding in podcasts, but also for the medium itself, we just needed to get a lot of energy in a very short period of time. And that sort of led to that sort of idea of, going all in a very big way, of just showing that we're serious about podcasting, we mean it, and we want to learn and evolve. But the strategy was always to go from that and then go pretty broad very quickly. And that's also, by the way, how you should think about, because a lot of people are like, oh, they're going to go exclusive. And so they're going to play the Netflix game. And actually, we always thought about ourselves more as a platform because that's where we came from. But in order to get the talent to come to Spotify in the first place, we kind of felt like, okay, we're gonna have to do something big in order to allow people to take the leap and even try to do this new thing that just would be different than the thing that'd been existing for the better part of 15 years prior.
What's interesting to me is that, we've been on YouTube for a long time, and it feels like YouTube accidentally became a podcast platform, right? It was a place for shorter videos, and then all of a sudden videos came into the world of podcasting and they took off there. It's heavily algorithmic. That's how a lot of people get discovered over there. I feel like a lot of our audience wants to know, how do you actually get discovered on Spotify, and how is Spotify differentiating itself from how YouTube works when it comes to discovery for a new podcast?
Yeah. I so much think so many of the developments of a platform really kind of comes from the beginning of where you started. And so I think when you think about our history and heritage, it really comes from music, right? And we have always sort of played that game, which has been very important for us, which is the primary thing that we're trying to do is play that balance of sort of allowing artists to be discovered, but at the same time truly thinking about how you can build a career on Spotify. So that is a balance, by the way, where you're constantly going to have to sort of experiment, and sometimes you're going to gear more towards discovery, sometimes you're going to gear more towards dependability. But the good thing is we're not a new platform. We've been doing this for many, many years. And already in the beginning of podcasting, it was sort of the same story. And for us, it's we call it algotorial, which is our strategy, which is kind of the best of both worlds. We do have the algorithmic approach of the other platforms, but we also have the editorial approach of some of the early, say, Apple Podcasts and so on as well. And we think that sort of balance between the human part and the algorithmic part is and always have been Spotify's sort of special sauce. And you can see it already in a pretty big way in just how we approach books as just one example, or even how we approach courses, which is educational content that's just right now live in the UK, just to name a few examples, that we're kind of always meshing between editorial and algorithmic content.
That's really interesting because that's essentially the ethos of, curation is the ethos of what the radio was. When I was a kid and I would listen to the radio here in LA, like, somebody's curating the music for you, right? And I think right now the user across most platforms is the curator in a sense, right? Is playing with an algorithm to curate their own feed. But human curation is an important piece of the puzzle when it comes to long form content, primarily because you said these two words. You said discoverability and dependability.
Mm-hmm.
Is the suggestion there that like dependability is loyalty, meaning like if I have a favorite show, that it's dependable, that it's there
Yes,
next week?
absolutely.
Yeah, because like for me to discover a new podcast and decide to jump into it is a pretty big ask,
Yeah.
right? Whereas with music, like you guys have innovated quite a bit in discovery. Discover Weekly is like honestly the way that I've discovered a ton of artists.
Mm-hmm.
But that feels harder in the world of podcasting. How have you found that users take to some of that editorial curation? And like, how did they jump into, the stat that always amazes me is that in 2020, there was 900,000 podcasts launched worldwide.
Yeah.
That's a crazy stat.
Yeah.
And you'd have to imagine that more and more podcasts will continue to get launched.
Yeah. Well, you're right. These are two very different types of formats, right? And I think the investment that you're asking a user to do in music is obviously far less than on a podcast, because you just think about it. Music is like 3 minutes, and usually within the first 5 to 10 seconds, you can figure out whether you want to spend the rest of 3 minutes listening to this. In a podcast, you kind of have to give it, in many cases, 5, 10, 15, 20, maybe even 30 minutes before you know if it's any good. So you tend to go towards dependability, no matter how the platform itself looks like. So do you know the host, or do you know any of the guests that's on the show? Then perhaps you'll give it a chance. And if you like it and seen it 2 or 3 times, then maybe you'll give it a go. But with that said, I think that the most important thing that we're trying to do when you talk about curation is, there's one thing actually giving you context. The other one is understanding the context. Why am I seeing this, and why is this relevant to me? And so you mentioned Discover Weekly. A huge part of what we do as a platform is we play on dependability to build trust with the users, so that by the time we want to introduce you to something new, you actually feel like this is probably very high likelihood, because Spotify has proven that it knows me so well by giving me so many things that I already like, that it's probably a high degree of likelihood that I'll enjoy this too. And then, of course, with video, it allows us a very different way. That allows us to much more in the feed, kind of introduce it. Obviously, with audio off, you can still read the subtitles and kind of get a feel for, is this something I want to do? But even where we place this clip matters. Because if we know in the segment of 2 hours that, okay, you've been interested of these types of things in the past, to get you right in that moment where we're supercharging you and showing you that, will probably merchandise this content in a very different way, so that you get more interested and want to dive deeper.
So I think about, when we first started uploading or turned video onto our podcast, because for a while it was an audio only show, and we put video on, YouTube was obviously the first place to upload. And I think largely with podcasts, that's because of discovery, right? The reality is on YouTube, if you can solve titles and thumbnails, you can get your show discovered. And it's also revenue. And, we've been uploading to Spotify since the beginning, and that is because of loyalty. Like, our audience doesn't miss on Spotify, right? But on YouTube, it can have variability. Now, the question is, revenue has traditionally been through baked in ads, running our own, dynamically inserted ads, but that's changing now. And I'm curious if we could talk about how you're thinking about revenue sharing, because we tweeted out that we were sitting down with you. The 2 biggest questions were discovery and revenue. How's that going to work? So
well, the good news is obviously those are exactly the things we're talking about here today. And I guess the third one being data, just being transparent about what's going on at platforms, so you as a creator can make better informed decisions. So let's dive into monetization. At the very core, we as a platform started with this mission, right, where we wanted to really kind of build a better product in music by creating something that was better than piracy. That's where we came from. And also at the same time solving the piracy problem, which was that all the musicians and songwriters weren't getting paid for it. So the core of the company is really solving those 2 things. How do we build something that's greater, which is usually give people what they want by allowing them to discover, but then at the same time solve the monetization aspect. And so in podcast, the whole industry has evolved quite a lot, from sort of download to streaming, from all of these measurement tools, all of these things. And obviously in video, it's totally different type of stacks. And we see that, being a huge barrier, why people aren't posting more video on Spotify too. But our real superpower is, of course, we're one of the world's largest subscription services. In fact, if you really think about it, we're almost the size of Netflix in terms of paying subscribers.
I think from what I read, it was 250 million premium subscribers.
Yeah, so we announced yesterday that we're more than 250 million paying subscribers.
Yeah, that's crazy.
globally.
That's a lot of people.
So what we're announcing today is we're basically opening that up. So now creators get the size of a Netflix subscription base to tap into, where we're helping you solve monetization by allowing you to participate with our premium revenue, and at the same time solving a consumer problem, which is, ads are becoming more and more prevalent in the user experience. And we see very clearly that consumers are actually tired of it. They're tuning out of it. And so we wanted to see, how can we create a win-win between creators and consumers? And in this case, the obvious superpower we bring to bear is the 250 million subscribers. So we're early days. We are innovating on this as we go, which is kind of why, we're starting in a few markets and then we'll expand. But I'm really excited about it because I truly believe this is going to be a game changer in how people monetize their content on Spotify, but also beyond.
I appreciate you guys as a brand taking a point of view here. And the point of view being that, the better your content does, actually, the more ads end up playing dynamically a lot of times.
Yep.
So you could be at odds with the success
Yeah.
of your own episodes.
Yeah, I think you guys said 11% of a podcast is ads. And that was up from like 3 months ago, which was 8%.
8%.
That's really significant. That's a lot of a piece of content to be advertising.
And our audience has called that out too sometimes when they listen. They just go, there's so many ads.
Yeah.
How can I enjoy this?
Yeah.
The question I have for splitting up and doing a revenue share based off subscription is, do subscriptions have to rise at a higher rate than the overall success of viewership and listenership? Because if subscriptions stay at a stable rate, well, of course you want them to go up, but if views go up as well and people start doing better and better, there's less money from the subscriptions to dole out to all of the users.
Yeah, I can certainly see that fear, but I think the amazing thing, what we've seen with Spotify, one of the big things that we realized is, we call it the value to price ratio for consumers. And the most important thing to take care of in that equation is value. The more value you give, it actually turns out, and the big sort of insight in Spotify, price eventually takes care of itself. So if we can offer something that's a magical experience where you feel like you're being entertained, you're being informed, and you're being educated, people are willing to pay for that experience. And we see it very, very clearly with Spotify today. Like, when we started, paying for music was not something people were willing to do at all. So, waking up in the morning and paying $10 a month for Spotify felt like a pretty crazy thing. And now, in many cases, we see people paying far more than that for Spotify, but they still feel like it's the greatest deal ever, because we kept adding more and more and more value. So my concern isn't really that. It's really around sort of more around how do we create something that's just a magical experience? Because I feel right now, we're putting the consumer and the creator at odds with each other with the current model on the advertising side. Because, what Gustav talked about on stage, the 8% going to 11%, that's like the average. But in a downturn economy, we certainly see examples right now where it's like 15 and 20%. And now you are, as a creator, in this very difficult situation where you may actually, have a terrible experience for the consumer. You're churning them out in order to meet the numbers. But if that keeps going up, if people are churning out and you do worse, then you have to fill out even more ads in order to get the experience to work. And then eventually, that's not a great way to manage a business. And so what I feel with this is we're giving creators another avenue. It's by far not the only way, by the way, and it's great for a creator, and we certainly would recommend it that you should be on every platform that aligns with your interests.
How does the mechanics of the revenue share work? Like, obviously those 11% of ads, like that is the majority of how most creators make money is through brand deals, advertising.
Right.
And in podcasting, it's through DAI and baked in ads. Obviously, the baked in ads will remain the same. But the mechanics of
sponsorship too.
And sponsorship.
Yep.
Yeah. So are the mechanics of how we make money from premium subscribers, is that based on time spent or consumption hours?
Yeah.
And what can we expect from a revenue perspective there?
I can't really get into specifics, unfortunately, today. But what I can say is that we have a history of doing this. And the same thing has been true in pretty much every vertical we've been. So we started in music. We grew music. We then added podcasts to it. The number one fear from podcasters at that moment was like, is this going to be influential? Or is there going to be cannibalization against the existing RSS feeds that I'm doing today, et cetera? And from the music side, the big fear was like, okay, well, you're doing this podcasting thing now. Is this going to mean less payouts to music? And then got into books. Both of the other categories were worried about it. And the book guys were, is this going to be big compared to all the other digital platforms that we're currently on? And the end result has been sort of the same all over, which is the reality is by offering a better consumer experience, the payouts in each of these verticals keeps growing. And I think this is what's going to happen on the video side too. So I can't give specifics on exactly how it's going to work. And the truth is we're also learning and iterating as we're going to this. But what I can say is I think by now it should be very clear that we take monetization very seriously across the verticals, and in each vertical we've been in. And our goal here is to grow the pie. We're not going to do something here which ultimately ends up with the creator in a worse position, because ultimately that's not going to be a long-term sustainable position for us to be in, or the creators to be in too.
My hope and my desire is that the revenue will be perhaps more stable because it's based off of subscription, right? Because advertising is a very volatile industry, and a lot of video creators specifically know that January is an incredibly different month than December, right? And for any number of economic reasons, advertising rates can fluctuate majorly.
Yeah.
So I think our collective hope and desire is that we will see, as payouts start to come and roll out, that it is perhaps a more stable source of revenue.
Yeah, I think you're bringing up a great point, which I certainly would expect the same to be true. But also, if you think about Spotify, and we talked about this just a moment ago, we're certainly in the sort of, if you think about all platforms on this continuum between discovery and dependability, like we're definitely on the dependability side.
Yeah.
We're definitely improving our discovery ability, but perhaps more so than many other platforms, we're really on the dependability side. And then you may say, okay, well, why are you that? And the reason why is because of where we started this conversation, which is, why did we start the company? Is we want to solve these two things. We want to solve how to create an amazing user experience, but at the same time, making sure that you can have a livelihood as a creator. And that then implies really dependability at the very core, where some other platforms may put the user a lot more in the center. And at that point, it may be discovery is the primary reason the platform exists, which is cool in itself, but it's a very different reason why we exist.
I think platforms always need, some level of model citizen, right? Like whether it's YouTube, Instagram, Spotify, like there's always some version of a model citizen. And I'd imagine that, what you were discussing earlier is like you do these big deals with creators, and not only does it showcase the emphasis on podcasting, it also shows what a podcaster on Spotify looks like, which is really important.
Yep.
In this next chapter, can you describe what you think the kind of model creator for Spotify looks like? Because there's also a pretty significant rebrand that is just a word, but I think is actually a significant signal to go from Spotify for podcasters to Spotify for creators. And that makes me think, we're podcasters. We've also been video creators in the past. Is there other types of video that we imagine in this environment? What does the model creator look like for Spotify in the future?
Yeah. Yeah, we think a lot about this. And I think that there's kind of two things that we're very passionate about. One is that we think creators are multi-homed. A lot of platforms are trying to win the business by being the only platform for them. And we actually want creators to be multi-home because that's the heritage we come from with music too. Music, for copyright reasons, actually, it allows a radio station, for instance, to put music on without having to have a direct deal with a record company, etc. So we've always lived with that reality, and we find that that's what most creators want. Now, obviously, in that, what we want to be is to be the best partner, but not the only partner that a creator has. And so we feel like we got to earn our spot in being that. Now, the important part about the future of that, I think, is so many of the creators I speak to today are multi-talented and don't want to sort of confine themselves to being a certain type of creator. And even if they start out in one way, they are much more akin to entrepreneurs in how you build your business, right? So you may start with something and you build it for a number of years, and then you see an opportunity in the corner somewhere, or you have a creative itch and you want to pursue something in a related field that's still creative, but is different. And so what we really see, and you can see that with the Megan Trainor session that we had here too, she's an artist, but she's also an author. She's also a podcaster, right? And so I believe that the future of these creative entrepreneurs is really that they're multi-talented and they're going to want to do a lot of different things. And if you think about that experience today on the other platforms that exist today, it's typically one format in how that shows up. There's lots of type of content you can put in that. We talked about sort of podcasting actually working in a video format similar to other videos, more native to, say, a YouTube or something, right? But it's still the same format. But actually at Spotify, we clearly distinguish the different formats and the experience is very different. So a piece of music content is different to a piece of podcast that's also different to a book that's also different to a course. And that's really different from just normal video that you will upload. And the benefit you get is, imagine, me being here on the show. Let's say I was an author. We could have directly linked in the show notes, or even as we're speaking here now on the visual side, to the book that I'm sitting here talking about. And because you can consume this book straight away on Spotify, there's a direct conversion to that experience. And similarly, you could be a music person and then also be on a podcast and vice versa. And I think that is the interplay. I was just shown, by the way, a piece of software here by another creator. It was showing this sort of research tool on how to find great guests, and like typing sort of a topic, and you can see who's overperforming or underperforming. And it was pretty wild. It was way more sort of scientific than I would have imagined getting guests on. But the interesting part for us though is more around, okay, well, what happens when you have that guest, and how do we sort of take this relationship forward, where if you wanted to know more about me, you could also see all the other things that I've been part of, whether that is things I published myself or whether that's where I've been a guest myself too. So that is the future, I think.
It's really interesting. Our top performing episode on Spotify is actually with a musician named Jacob Collier.
Oh yeah.
And I think largely because Jacob is like so, abundant in the Spotify environment. But that's really interesting. Well, one thing that kind of surprised me from, the earnings call was that I think around like 84% of Spotify's revenue is from premium subscribers. And 11% was ad supported. That was surprising to me, but it also makes sense. And actually, you mentioned like as creators, we are entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
And I think about, we've always toyed around with some level of subscription, right? Podcasting has done Patreon,
Yep.
and like that actually works really well with
Yep.
these deep intimate
Yep.
relationships you have with audiences.
Yep.
The big change that's happening, and correct me if I'm wrong, but like we do run and sell our own DAI campaigns and run them through Megaphone.
Yep.
So those won't play for premium subscribers anymore.
Correct. If you opt into this program.
Right. Which for me, the ideal scenario actually is that we move in a direction where the subscription can support it. And a lot of that is because in podcasting, when you do that, you do get to have a more direct value relationship with your audience.
Yep.
We just had a guest on named Peter Attia.
Yep.
He's a doctor. He does not do any advertising.
Yep.
It's fully subscription based.
Yep.
And that changes his decision making on episodes.
Yep.
Because when we're so deeply performance backed with advertising.
Yep.
But that is a significant shift.
Yep.
In the industry, right? That you guys are pushing.
Yeah, for sure. But just to take a step back, I think it was a few years back. If you look at something like in tech, there's this guy called Ben Thompson,
Stratechery.
So the way he shows up on the platform, for him, he has a subscription to himself through Stratechery that you subscribe to, and to Dithering, this other podcast that he does as well. And again, this kind of plays into us trying to be the best partner to creators, irregardless of the situation you're in. So if you look at how he shows up, is you have to be a subscriber. So he solves his own monetization by me subscribing on his website to Stratechery, and that unlocks his content on Spotify. So for the average person who's not a subscriber, if you type in Stratechery, you'll find it, and it has like a lock on it, and it says that you have to be a paying subscriber in order to listen to his content. And
is that done via Spotify, or is that like a RSS key with a
so that is something we call SOA. So that unlocks the experience on Spotify. And so, but all of the payment mechanism and the membership and all that stuff, that's on his service. And
so, do you ever bundle that in the Spotify premium subscription? Or
well, that's obviously sort of a natural question now that we're in the subscription. But for me, the most important thing that I'm trying to convey here is we are actually very flexible on how creators monetize their work, and we want to offer as many options as possible, all the way to you having your own subscription, and actually you're like, look, I can take care of monetization myself. I just need this to be in the Spotify experience because that's where my users are for. That's the future I believe in too, where creators should come to us, and we will have all of these different tools depending on the different circumstances of what you may need help with. Some may want us to help with monetization, some may not. And that could be true of advertising, but it could actually be true, like in Ben Thompson's case, of subscription too. Yeah. Some may want us to do more on the discovery and promotion front. So on the music side, we have something called Marketplace, where we actually help artists and label teams and managers promote their music in a pretty big way. What's the equivalent for that in podcasting or in books? That's a big thing to contemplate. And then all the way to, of course, the formats of like what kind of ways, clips, videos, not videos, audio, books, courses, all of these different things that is sort of part of the palette of what this sort of next creative entrepreneur is doing. And I think this is sort of the key for me because, as we spoke about, it's not a one size fits all. And I realized why we on the internet, this is how the internet works. We had to start with a one size fits all to get the consumers, but we're ready for this next generation of platform. And I think this next generation platform is going to give the creator a lot more control and the consumer a lot more control too of how they want to interact and how they want to monetize that relationship and how the creator wants to grow. And we're just trying to build the best, basically be the R&D department for the creative entrepreneur of tomorrow.
My last question for you is about tools for creators on Spotify and specifically AI. Samir showed me Notebook LM a couple weeks ago, and mine was blown that you could, we input our newsletter and it gave us back like a pretty entertaining 15-minute podcast from 2 AI hosts. Yeah. And we see like the AI playlist or the DJ that Spotify is adopting AI in certain ways. How do you see AI playing a role in the next generation?
Oh, it's going to be huge. And by the way, I'm a huge fan of the Notebook LM thing too. And I was speaking to the team who built it, and it's so amazing. Just so much of this is just serendipity. They've sort of had this thing internally that a bunch of engineers kind of liked and put it out in the world, and it sort of took off. And it's now one of the more popular AI products out there. And that's the crazy thing, because you can't really predict it. The way I would put it is, what happens with technology, we get this sort of breakthrough, once a decade or so, and then all the rules change overnight, and the whole industry are kind of scrambling and trying to figure out what are the new best practices in this world, and then eventually kind of settles. We had it with, mobile. When the App Store came around, we all the best practice. I don't know if you remember, but all the designs were kind of unique and novel. And these days, it's more like best practices of how you build a sort of app. I think we're entering the same era for AI too. But our goal is pretty simple. We want to utilize AI to allow creators to express themselves in new ways, and in much more lower the barrier and lower the friction of creating amazing things, basically. And then for consumers, it is really about tailoring Spotify to be more personalized towards you, and having a more personal relationship to Spotify. You can certainly imagine, being able to converse a lot more. You can see it already with the AI playlists we're doing, where you can, in a more natural language way, express sort of what you want to listen to, and Spotify responding to it by creating something that's tailor-made for exactly that. And so imagine now what that takes us in 5 or 10 or 15 years. And it's going to be a very different Spotify than the one you're seeing now.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, I think I actually put in the earnings call to Notebook LM to listen to it as a podcast.
Great.
And I think that's the bizarre question for me in the future is, if I'm interested in the Spotify earnings call plus the NBA scores from the night before plus stocks, can I just input a bunch of articles and then produce my own podcast and say my commute is 25 minutes?
Yeah, probably. You should be able to do that. But, the more amazing things is also we can do that, of course, across music and talk and books and whatever based on that experience, rather than necessarily changing how the creative work was done. We can sort of augment it to fit that journey. We think a lot in sessions, by the way, like what is the session we're filling here, and what is the user intent. And that's actually how we got into podcasting, because we realized in the car, one of the key reasons why people weren't listening to Spotify in the car was because we didn't have talk, and talk was a part of the listening. They still listen to 80%, even on radio music, but they wanted the talk part to inform them about news, about weather, about all these other things. So it certainly, I think, kind of tailors to that.
Yeah. Well, cool. Thank you so much, Daniel.
Thank you for joining us.
Appreciate it.
Excited to see this next chapter.
Yeah, I am too. Well, thanks for having me.
All right. Welcome to the debrief. That last bit of that conversation, I think we could have had a long conversation with Daniel about AI, but he did have to leave.
Yeah, his eyes really lit up. And he said a bunch of stuff that I was like, wait, what does that mean?
Yeah, you never know. So the thing about Daniel that's really interesting and different from some of the other platform CEOs that we've talked to is that he's a founder CEO. And when you talk to a founder CEO, they are in the weeds of building. So he gets excited about looking at the future 5, 10, 15 years, and he's working on stuff that's not at all what's happening today. It's what's going to happen, what the world could look like in 15 years.
Yeah. And with most of the tech CEOs and platform CEOs that we've sat with, you get this underlying feeling that they've just seen more than anybody else. They just want to know everything.
Yeah.
But obviously they're keeping it to themselves.
Yeah. So, I mean, the first thing that I want to say about meeting Daniel is I really just wanted to ask him, in looking back on this conversation, just what's it like to be the founder of Spotify?
What's that like?
That's crazy.
Yeah.
You made one of the most influential apps of our generation.
There's a whole narrative show on Netflix about you.
Yeah.
How does that feel?
But I think in zooming out at the world of, what this could mean and what this does mean for video creators, I also wanted to talk about our own experience with Spotify and posting content to Spotify. But first, let's talk about some things from the interview, some things that really stuck out.
For me, the first thing that really stuck out was when you asked him about, the Joe Rogan deals, the Caller Daddy deals. And the reason that he gave for those massive deals in the millions, which were like NBA contract style deals, was not necessarily that they made sense economically, although I'm sure they may have, right? The reason that he gave was that like the podcast space was declining and we felt that it needed some energy and excitement, right? That like almost as if we were going to save podcasting, we needed to do something big.
That's amazing. Yeah.
That was reason number one.
Again, that's some that's some founder visionary stuff where you're like, hey, if podcasting is going to be a big part of our platform, we need to re-energize the podcast world.
Yeah.
And I actually do think that stat about 900,000 podcasts being launched in 2020, yes, it has to do with the fact that people were home and during the pandemic, but I also think it has a lot to do with the deals that were announced. Like the same reason people get excited to become an NBA player.
Yeah, man,
like
it was a new American dream.
It's a new American dream for all types of people, not just content creators. Podcasting is also very different from filmmaking. You can do it. It is a thing that a lot of people can do. And seeing a headline like Joe Rogan inks deal for $100 million, Call Her Daddy for $60 million, your mind goes, wait, I got to pick up a mic. If you're a creative person, if you're someone who has something to say, like that's
just opened people's eyes to like, wait, I didn't realize that could happen.
I didn't realize these were so valuable. Yeah.
Yeah. And again, when you look at the ease of production, it's like, okay, I can give it a shot. So yeah, I found that really interesting that these massive deals, which they don't do as much anymore, were really there to like provide energy to the space.
And I think they did. Like if you look at what podcasting is in 2024, it is without a doubt one of the biggest culture drivers in the US.
Totally.
For sure, right? I don't know internationally how much it has impacted other countries, but I think in the US, podcasting is one of the drivers of culture, of decision making. It's a really interesting medium that's totally different from any other one.
The more you think about it, obviously they're not just making that move so that the podcast space feels energized. That's way too much money to dole out. So there are economic reasons for it. And if you think about it, with music, both YouTube and Spotify have to pay the record labels. Mm-hmm. And they pay the record labels a lot. Mm-hmm. They're not getting as much money from premium subscriptions from someone who's in music than from someone who makes a podcast. Right? Because you're not paying any royalties for that content. So there actually is a pretty good economic incentive because the creators are paying for the cost of production and then you get more revenue from those if it provides value to users and they sign up, right?
Yeah, the reality is, again, the difference between the two platforms is that Spotify is a membership club, right? It's subscription. So it's, can I keep my members happy and can I get new members? Mm-hmm. That's what's important. On YouTube, it's different from that. It's like, can I bring people to the platform and increase their session time? But this now comes to the second thing that I pulled from the interview, which is Daniel describing Spotify as algatorial from a discovery perspective, meaning it's not algorithmic, it's not editorial, it's a mix of the two. Mm-hmm. And that is tangibly different from YouTube, which is algorithmic.
Yeah, editorial means you make a decision of what you think is good, right? So it can feel like it's a bit out of your hands as a creator. I think on YouTube, views are incredibly available if you study.
If you study the platform,
works, you can find viewership, and that is obviously different. What was interesting to me in talking to Daniel was he said, "Look, like we have algorithms as well, but we rank things on a spectrum of discovery versus dependability.
Yes,
and we lean more towards dependability, which means that as a creator, what is important on Spotify is, are you consistent?
Are you there?
Are you there for your community every week? Whereas there are a lot of creators on YouTube who like, you don't even know their upload cadence. It's just about making a good video.
You might not know
that can be watched for all of time.
You might not know if a creator like a Ryan Trahan takes 6 weeks between uploads. You might not even like think about it, but he'll still get 20 million views on his next upload or 10 million views.
I'll speak to my own user behavior on YouTube. I'm looking for the best possible video in that moment when I open up YouTube, and I don't care if it's from 4 days ago or if it's from 2 years ago necessarily, but when I open up Spotify, I'm not looking for an episode from years ago for the most part, right? And I think that's why it is more about dependability. are you there every single week?
And you're looking for something on Spotify that's very familiar to you.
Mm-hmm.
Like to find a new show is really hard because you don't want it when you open that environment. But I think Spotify is just more like Netflix than it is like YouTube, right?
It's more editorial.
It's more editorial.
Yeah.
Like Netflix, when we open up Netflix tells us what shows matter.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Spotify is the same. When you open up Spotify, it tells you what shows matter.
Yeah.
And I think that is
Only difference though is that anyone can upload to Spotify.
right.
Not everybody can upload to Netflix.
The third thing from the interview that was interesting was him just talking about the general state of advertising. The creator economy, bottom line, is built on the foundation of advertising. That is why the creator economy exists. But he brings up some interesting points of that consumers are tuning out of ads. And it is a question that as the creator economy has emerged, consumers are hearing more ads than ever before, right?
I want to take this moment to thank the sponsor of this episode, Samir's Haircut.
Yeah.
It's new. It's fresh. I'm sure you noticed it. It's different than the episode when we sat down with Daniel. Thanks to Samir's Haircut. Back to the episode.
Yeah. I thought maybe you had a sponsor and maybe you booked a deal without me. It's like, great.
Look, man, you're on the business side. I'm on the creative side. I'm not booking sponsors.
But yeah, it's an interesting conversation for the future of just the creator economy in general. His suggestion is kind of like, are ads as effective? Are they effective enough? Now, of course, for a platform that is a membership club, you don't really want ads there. If 84% of your revenue is coming from subscription, do you need the 11% advertising? Like, how important is that to you? Obviously, in a $4.1 billion quarter, it's not insignificant, but he can say that from the context of like, advertising is not as important to Spotify. Mm-hmm. So, I think you have to take it with a grain of salt. But it's interesting of the overload of ads. The other thing was in their presentation, they said that podcast episodes are now like on average 11% ads.
Yeah, it was a really interesting point that was made during the announcements that your episodes, the better they are and the longer they are, the more ads will play and the worse the experience will be.
Yeah.
So you're kind of like at odds, right? The experience is at odds with making money.
Right. Now, we do receive premium subscription revenue from YouTube.
Yeah.
And during the conversation in my head, I was like, I don't know how much revenue that is or
what the split is.
What the split is on premium revenue. I still don't know that answer.
We don't know that answer actually for Spotify either. We don't know what the split is or how the mechanics work. And I think that's going to be really important actually, that it gets more defined in the future of how, as a creator, do I look at my analytics and know what matters when it comes to the money I will get from premium subscriptions, right? Because on YouTube, it's super straightforward. It's like 55-45, we get it.
Right. So I don't know that answer, but we've done 140 million views on long form episodes on YouTube. What percentage do you think our premium revenue is?
2.5.
10%.
Oh,
yeah.
That's more than I thought.
It's way more than I thought too. So 10% of our lifetime revenue from YouTube, which is near $1 million, 100,000 of that comes from YouTube Premium.
$100,000 from YouTube Premium?
Yeah.
Whoa. Wow.
Yeah, it's more than I thought. And so then you look at it and you go, what if that environment is just like more, the lion's share of the revenue is coming from premium subscriptions and we do 140 million downloads on Spotify? That could be really significant.
Yeah. Time will tell, I think, what these payouts look like. Because if there's one thing that certain creators will absolutely share, their back-end metrics.
Yeah.
Right? And that's one of the biggest educational moments, and it will be one of the biggest educational moments for all of us to see, okay, that's how many streams, that's how many watch hours this creator got, and that's how much they got paid. On YouTube, if two creators have the same amount of like views and watch time, they could have drastically different payouts.
Sure.
Depending on their CPMs and what industry they're in, and what advertising is like in their industry. Whereas on Spotify, I think technically, like a stream is a stream, a watch hour is a watch hour.
That's true.
So I'm going to be really interested to see when creators start sharing their revenue, are there two creators with essentially the exact same viewership and watch hours? Do they have the exact same payout?
So one thing that interests me quite a bit about this is if this works, does this open the doors for other subscription platforms like a Netflix to work with creators? Like if this model works, could there be a world where you're like an approved Netflix partner? You're part of the Netflix partner program and you get to upload content to Netflix. Because there are now also, every platform is freemium. Every platform is free, ad supported, and then subscription based. It could.
And if you're somewhat editorial, you don't have to surface any of the content.
No. So it could be laying the foundation for what the future of the creator economy could look like.
I'd be fascinated if a company like Netflix said, hey, here's our brand guidelines for what it means to be a Netflix production. Here's the quality of the camera. Here's the type of stories we tell. Put it out there for all of us. And be like, if you do these things, you can upload to Netflix. And here will be, this is the way that we will compensate you.
I mean, it's not so different from what Spotify's doing.
Yeah.
It's not. So if it works, it could be something that we see.
Yeah. Down the road, are we going to see YouTube, Spotify, and Netflix basically converging into a very similar platform?
So I want to talk about the 4 things, in my opinion, that Spotify needs to do to win video creators or to make it a good experience for video creators.
Hit me.
The first is establish revenue transparency and milestones. So meaning, how does this aligned incentive structure work? Because again, we know that with YouTube. If we grow, YouTube grows. If YouTube grows, we grow, because we know the split. We know how we get paid. I think we have to know the transparency into how we get paid. Is it watch hours? Is it whatever it is?
Yeah.
And then milestones, meaning like what is the YouTube play button for Spotify?
If you're a new creator, what are you trying to get to?
What am I trying to get to? Am I trying to get to 1 million downloads? Am I trying to get to 1 million watch hours? Am I trying to get to 1 million followers? Like, what am I trying to get to? So I need that. The second thing is they have to support discovery and curation in the Spotify way. And they've done discovery and curation for music better than I think anyone else, in my opinion. One of the greatest tools is blends. I don't know how many people use that, but that's like if you and I created a blended playlist, that's like your top artist, my top artist, and it's updated on a weekly basis. So you pull the thread of podcasting and word of mouth. That's how podcasts get discovered, is if I told you, hey, you got to listen to this podcast. Can they do blends or some sort of like friends discover of what pods you're listening to, what pods I'm listening to, and mix them together?
I think YouTube should do that too, and Instagram.
Yeah.
And TikTok.
Yeah.
If you were like, hey, I want to look at a For You page that is strictly what myself and my buddy are into.
But like, can I borrow Colin's algorithm?
Yeah. Like, can we like combine algorithms for a second?
Yeah. It'd be super interesting, but it's like playlisting that they do all the time in music. But you could do that with podcasting, and you can mix users. You can also show me celebrities, algorithms when it comes to, or celebrities picks when it comes to podcasting. Word of mouth is how podcasts get discovered. How do you scale that in the platform?
That's interesting. I would also love to know, like, what's your most listened to podcast? What's your most listened to artist?
Yeah, we'll find out in Wrapped.
I'm pretty sure mine is Sabrina Carpenter, actually.
Yeah, you've said that many times.
I'm pretty confident. Carry on.
But like outside of the hits, you're listening to that too?
Yeah.
You like deep cuts?
Yeah, Slim Pickens is great.
Never heard.
I don't even know what that means.
Nope. All right, number 3, and I'm pretty adamant about this one. Keep viewership private.
Whoa.
So on Spotify, one of the extreme differences between Spotify and YouTube is that you cannot see how many views a video does on Spotify. I think they will naturally be tempted to have public viewership, but that goes against the algotorial method, in my opinion. You cannot have editorial consideration of what makes good content on your platform and show me what a model citizen looks like on your platform with public viewership, because public viewership means too much in the world of video. If there's a video with 20,000 views and a video with 1 million views, but the one with 20,000 is more representative of where you want the platform to go,
the one with 1 million will dictate the behavior of thousands of creators.
And that's a great thing, that like content has become democratic in that way, and the audience tells you what's good content. But we don't know. I guess sometimes we do. Netflix is like now kind of releasing some public numbers, but largely we don't know how things are doing. And like, I think we have too much of a relationship with numbers, and in a subscription environment, I don't want numbers. I don't want to know.
I agree with that.
And as a creator, I want I want to keep that environment private. I think you'll probably have, if you're Spotify, you'll have a better experience bringing video creators over to the platform if viewership numbers are private.
What I am okay with are rankings. Right. This is the number 3
Yeah.
podcast
Yes.
in business this week. You were the number 5.
I think they should go further in that direction.
Totally.
And that's my number 4 is establish model citizens. If you are going to roll out video and video creators, and that means not just video podcasting, then push to the front of the line, show us who are the model citizens. Tell us what makes good content. We asked Daniel the question in the interview of like, what is the next Spotify model citizen? And it was kind of interesting. It was actually his answer was more of like a creator who's making multiple formats.
The
like
multi-homed,
the multi-homed,
multimodal, he called it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So a creator who, for example, if we had a book
Yeah.
that was for sale, you can listen to the audiobook and you can reach it from this episode.
Just made me laugh thinking about how Jake Shane has an album, podcaster and TikTok creator. He has an album now out, which is like a comedy album. But that's like a funny thought to think about.
Can I pause for a sec?
Yeah.
I know we haven't had a gripe in a while.
Yeah.
I think I have a gripe.
Okay, hit me.
When someone goes, just made me laugh, and then they say something.
Why?
You didn't laugh.
No, but did I not laugh?
No, you didn't
You
laugh.
go back?
No, you just said, it just made me laugh.
I was laughing in my head.
You were laughing in your head. but
Laughing
you
in my
weren't
head.
laughing out loud.
Wow. You know, I typically disagree with your gripes, but I think
you agree with
I think
that
I
one.
agree with that
Yeah,
one. Yeah.
I
I
got you.
apologize for saying
Thanks,
that.
man.
Yeah.
I accept your apology.
It made me think in a comedic way.
Sure. In a lighthearted way.
In a lighthearted way.
Thank you.
In my own mind.
I appreciate the change.
But yeah, it does inform you. It's like, oh, maybe releasing an audio book here is interesting
Mhm.
alongside a
Or a
podcast
course,
or a
right.
course, or like what does that mix look like? So continuing to push forward those case studies of like, what does a model citizen look like?
Overall,
Yeah.
exciting that Spotify is getting into the space like this
Yeah.
and that there is competition for YouTube in a very different way, a different model.
Yeah, I think largely also because Spotify is a serious home of music, which makes it culturally just hold a different space in the world. And I think Spotify, being a big show on Spotify, also holds a different cultural space. So I think the platform's really interesting. I think this event was really interesting. And if this subscription model works, I think it's going to open up a whole new side of the creator economy.
Agreed.
All right, so thanks so much to Daniel for coming on the show. And if you guys have thoughts about Spotify and video, put them in the comments here, either on YouTube or the comments on Spotify, because this show's on both.
I'll be honest, I don't really check the comments on Spotify, but on this episode,
I do, and they're hilarious. They're great.
I'll check them.
Yeah.
So if you've got something to say,
Even if you're watching on YouTube, just click on
head over to
in the
Spotify,
description,
leave
head
a
over-
comment.
Yeah, leave a comment. All right, see ya.